There is something strangely quiet about healing, not the kind of silence found in empty rooms or deep forests after snowfall, but a quieter process hidden beneath ordinary life. A process happening constantly, invisibly, inside every living body on Earth. At this very moment, while cities glow beneath midnight clouds and millions of people drift slowly toward sleep, human cells are repairing torn tissues, replacing damaged molecules, rebuilding skin, sealing microscopic wounds, and correcting tiny biological mistakes before the mind even becomes aware of them. Healing rarely announces itself. A broken bone may ache loudly. Illness may arrive dramatically. But recovery itself is almost silent, slow, methodical, ancient. For most of human history, healing appeared mysterious, almost supernatural. Ancient civilizations looked at wounds closing over time and saw evidence of divine intervention. In ancient Egypt, priests mixed medicine with ritual. In Greece, patients traveled to sleeping temples devoted to the god Asclepius, hoping dreams themselves would reveal cures. Across Asia, Africa, and the Americas, healers studied plants, minerals, breath, movement, and the strange connection between emotion and physical suffering long before modern science had words for hormones or immune systems. And yet beneath all these traditions was the same enduring observation. The body wants to survive, not perfectly, not forever, but persistently. If you cut your skin, blood cells immediately begin organizing themselves into barriers. If harmful bacteria enter the body, immune cells communicate through chemical signals like distant lanterns flashing across darkness. If emotional trauma overwhelms the nervous system, the brain itself slowly rewires pathways over time, adapting in ways scientists are still struggling to fully understand. Healing is not a single event. It is a conversation, a continuous negotiation between damage and repair. And perhaps one of the most extraordinary things about healing is that much of it happens while we sleep. Tonight, somewhere beyond your window, hospitals remain awake beneath fluorescent light. Night nurses move quietly through corridors. Machines pulse with soft electronic rhythms. Ambulances pass through intersections beneath empty traffic signals. Yet inside millions of sleeping people, an older and quieter medicine is already at work without technology at all. During deep sleep, growth hormone increases, tissue repair accelerates, immune activity changes. The brain clears away metabolic waste through a recently discovered system known as the glymphatic system, almost like moonlit tides washing through the landscape of the mind itself. Scientists only confirmed the existence of this cleansing system within the last decade. For centuries, humans slept without realizing that each night the brain was carefully washing itself. There is something humbling in that thought. Even when consciousness disappears into dreams, the body continues protecting us. The immune system alone is astonishing in its complexity. Inside the bloodstream drift billions of cells behaving less like isolated particles and more like an intelligent civilization. White blood cells patrol constantly through tissues, searching for infections or abnormalities. Some cells remember viruses encountered decades earlier. Others sacrifice themselves entirely to stop danger from spreading further. A single drop of blood contains entire worlds of communication. Chemical messages pass from cell to cell in endless streams. Tiny molecular receptors identify threats with extraordinary precision. Inflammation rises and falls like weather systems. Fever alters body temperature to slow invading organisms. Specialized proteins unfold and attach themselves to foreign particles with mechanisms so intricate they resemble microscopic engineering. And yet most people experience all of this simply as fatigue, warmth, soreness, or relief. The deeper mechanisms remain hidden beneath sensation. Perhaps this is why healing has always carried an atmosphere of mystery. The process feels personal and intimate, but much of it unfolds far below conscious awareness. You cannot directly feel collagen fibers reconnecting beneath healing skin. You cannot sense stem cells dividing in bone marrow. You cannot hear neurons strengthening new pathways after grief or trauma. But the changes continue quietly anyway. In some ways, the human body resembles a city rebuilding itself each night. Cells die constantly. Others replace them. The lining of the stomach renews itself rapidly to survive harsh acids. Skin cells rise slowly from deeper layers before eventually drifting away unnoticed into the air. Even the skeleton, which feels permanent and solid, is continuously being dissolved and rebuilt throughout life. You are not physically composed of the exact same material you carried years ago. The body is less like a statue and more like a river, always changing, always repairing, always moving between destruction and renewal. And yet healing is not only biological. Some wounds leave no visible scar. Modern neuroscience has revealed that emotional pain activates many of the same brain regions associated with physical injury. Heartbreak, grief, rejection, loneliness, prolonged fear. These experiences create measurable biological effects. Stress hormones rise, sleep becomes fragmented, immune function weakens, inflammation increases throughout the body. The mind and body are not truly separate systems. They are deeply entangled. A person living in chronic fear may heal more slowly from physical wounds. Someone surrounded by safety and social connection often recovers more effectively after illness. Even simple human touch can alter heart rate, cortisol levels, and nervous system activity in measurable ways. For thousands of years, humans sensed this intuitively, before scientific instruments could confirm it. Comfort itself became medicine. In medieval Europe, physicians sometimes believed that emotional states influenced bodily health through invisible internal balances called humors. While many of their theories were incorrect, they were observing something fundamentally real. Emotions shape physiology. Today, researchers continue uncovering the astonishing depth of that relationship. Trauma, for example, does not exist only as memory. Severe stress can physically alter neural pathways and even influence how genes are expressed through epigenetic changes. The body remembers difficult experiences in subtle biological ways, but remarkably, healing can also reshape those pathways over time. Neuroplasticity allows the brain to adapt throughout life. New experiences slowly rewrite old patterns. This process is often gradual enough to feel invisible while it happens. A grieving person may not notice recovery day by day, but months later, the nervous system has shifted. Emotional reactions soften, sleep improves, breathing deepens. The brain begins forming different associations around old memories. Healing rarely moves in straight lines. It circles, advances, retreats, pauses, continues. Nature itself seems to heal this way. After forest fires, certain ecosystems regenerate with surprising speed. Some pine cones only release seeds after exposure to extreme heat. Coral reefs damaged by storms slowly rebuild through tiny living organisms working continuously beneath ocean currents. Volcanic land, once molten and barren, gradually becomes covered in moss, then grass, then forests. Over decades or centuries, life repeatedly returns to damaged places, not because suffering never occurred, but because repair is woven deeply into biological existence itself. Perhaps this explains why humans often find healing landscapes emotionally calming. Forests, oceans, rain, mountains, deserts at dusk, these environments quietly mirror restoration cycles that have existed long before civilization. The nervous system appears to respond to them almost instinctively. Studies show that time spent in natural settings can lower stress hormones, reduce blood pressure, and calm activity within certain regions of the brain associated with rumination and anxiety. The body recognizes safety in ancient environments. Long before modern medicine emerged, early humans healed beneath trees, beside rivers, under stars, untouched by artificial light. And somewhere deep within the nervous system, traces of that older world still remain. For most of human existence, healing depended less on hospitals than on patients. A hunter with a fractured rib could do very little except rest beside a fire and wait while the body slowly rebuilt itself from within. A feverish child might survive because someone stayed nearby through the night, offering water, warmth, and protection, while the immune system fought unseen battles beneath the skin. Even now, despite extraordinary medical advances, Much of recovery still unfolds according to ancient biological rhythms that technology can support but never fully replace. Time remains one of the oldest medicines, and time behaves strangely inside the experience of healing. Pain stretches hours into something larger. Illness changes perception. Nights become longer. The body, weakened or exhausted, begins measuring existence differently. Hospitals often feel suspended outside ordinary reality for this reason. Fluorescent lights remain constant. Hallways stay awake at impossible hours. People drift between hope and uncertainty, while clocks continue moving with indifferent calm. Yet within these suspended moments, remarkable things happen. Some of the most important discoveries in medical history emerged not through dramatic revelation, but through quiet observation of how the body attempts to repair itself. In the 19th century, scientists first began understanding that infection was not caused by curses or bad air alone, but by microorganisms invisible to the naked eye. Suddenly, healing became linked not only to prayer or fortune, but to sanitation, cleanliness, and microscopic life. Before this realization, surgeries were unimaginably dangerous. A minor wound could become fatal simply because bacteria entered the body unchecked. Physicians moved between patients without sterilizing instruments. Operating rooms carried the scent of blood, sweat, and infection. Then slowly, almost unbelievably, survival rates improved, not because human biology had changed, but because humans had finally begun understanding the hidden world surrounding them. There is something deeply humbling about that pattern throughout history. Again and again, healing advances when humanity learns to see what was previously invisible. The microscope revealed bacteria. The X-ray revealed bone beneath skin. MRI scanners revealed living structures inside the brain. And modern genetics revealed another hidden universe altogether. One written not in stars or landscapes, but in sequences of molecular code folded inside nearly every cell of the body. Within human DNA exists a biological archive shaped across billions of years of evolution. Instructions for building organs, repairing tissues, fighting infection, growing hair, regulating heartbeat, healing wounds. Each human body carries ancient survival knowledge inherited across unbroken generations, stretching back beyond recorded history. Some scientists describe DNA as a language. Others compare it to music, long chains of information repeating, mutating, adapting through time. And hidden within this biological inheritance are repair systems so sophisticated they almost seem unreal. Cells constantly scan DNA for errors caused by radiation, toxins, or ordinary metabolic activity. Specialized proteins search for damaged sequences and attempt repairs before problems spread further. Most of this occurs silently and continuously throughout life. Without these systems, complex life would likely collapse under the weight of accumulated damage. In a sense, healing is not an occasional response to injury. It is one of the fundamental conditions required for life itself. Even aging reflects this balance. The human body does not simply weaken because time passes. Aging appears partly connected to the gradual accumulation of microscopic damage that repair systems can no longer fully correct. Cells become less efficient. Inflammation lingers longer. Healing slows, and yet even in old age, the body continues trying. Skin still closes around cuts. Bones still mend after fractures. The immune system still fights to protect the organism carrying it through time. There is a quiet dignity in that persistence. Perhaps this is why stories of recovery affect people so deeply. Healing reminds humans that fragility and resilience can exist simultaneously. A body can be vulnerable and astonishing at the same time. The heart itself is a perfect example. For centuries, humans treated the heart mainly as a symbol, the center of emotion, love, courage, grief. But biologically, it is an extraordinary muscular engine performing relentless work from before birth until death. By the end of an average lifetime, the heart may beat more than 3 billion times, 3 billion contractions, 3 billion moments of movement, and unlike most muscles, the heart almost never truly rests. Even more astonishing is how the body protects it. Networks of arteries expand and contract continuously to regulate blood flow. Electrical impulses synchronize precise rhythms across cardiac tissue. After injury, surrounding systems adapt in attempts to preserve circulation and survival. The body improvises, it compensates, it searches constantly for equilibrium. This search for balance appears everywhere in human biology. Body temperature fluctuates within narrow limits. Blood sugar rises and falls. Hormones shift according to daylight, stress, and sleep. Countless systems interact continuously to maintain stability within changing environments. Scientists call this homeostasis. But beneath the clinical term lies something almost poetic. Life survives through dynamic balance, not perfect stillness. Healing often follows the same principle. Recovery does not necessarily mean returning to an untouched original state. Sometimes healing means adaptation. Scar tissue forms differently than uninjured skin. Emotional recovery after loss may reshape personality permanently. The immune system learns from past infections and becomes altered by them. The healed body is often not identical to the body before injury. It is changed, but still alive, still moving forward. In forests, trees damaged by storms sometimes continue growing around old wounds for centuries. Their trunks twist around scars left by lightning or broken branches. Inside the wood remain records of droughts, fires, harsh winters, fungal invasions. The tree survives not by remaining untouched, but by incorporating injury into continued growth. Humans may heal in similar ways. And strangely, modern psychology suggests that difficult experiences can sometimes deepen certain forms of perception. People who endure serious illness or loss occasionally describe altered relationships with time, mortality, relationships, or beauty itself. Ordinary moments become sharper. Sunlight through windows feels more noticeable. Silence becomes meaningful. Attention shifts towards smaller details once ignored. Suffering is not inherently noble. Pain is not automatically transformative, but recovery can change the way consciousness moves through the world. Perhaps because healing reminds people of something easily forgotten during ordinary life. Existence is fragile, temporary, and deeply biological. Every breath depends on delicate systems functioning together in astonishing coordination. The lungs alone contain around 500 million alveoli, tiny air sacs where oxygen passes into blood through membranes so thin they are nearly microscopic. With each inhale, the outside world enters the body directly. Air becomes bloodstream. Atmosphere becomes survival, and the lungs heal constantly as well. Tiny hair-like structures called cilia sweep debris upward from airways. Immune cells patrol delicate tissues searching for pathogens. Damaged surfaces regenerate slowly after infection or irritation. The body never stops maintaining itself. Even now, while darkness gathers outside homes and apartment windows across the world, millions of sleeping lungs continue rising and falling automatically. Hearts continue beating, cells continue dividing, proteins continue folding themselves into intricate shapes required for life. There is comfort in realizing how much of survival happens without conscious effort. The body carries ancient intelligence older than thought itself. Long before human beings understood anatomy, before language, before civilization, life had already spent countless ages learning how to recover from damage. And hidden inside every living organism today are traces of that immense evolutionary memory, still quietly working through the night. In the deepest oceans, healing happens in darkness, almost untouched by sunlight. Far below the surface, where pressure becomes immense and temperatures approach freezing, certain organisms possess astonishing regenerative abilities. Sea stars can regrow lost arms. Some species of salamanders regenerate portions of their hearts and spinal cords. Planarian flatworms can rebuild nearly their entire bodies from tiny fragments of tissue. To human observers, these abilities can feel almost unreal, as though nature occasionally slips beyond the boundaries of ordinary biology, into something closer to science fiction. And yet, regeneration is not magic. It is information. Cells communicating with extraordinary precision, somehow knowing where to grow, what shape to restore, which tissues belong where. Modern scientists still do not fully understand how these processes are coordinated. Even now, laboratories around the world study regeneration in hopes of unlocking deeper medical possibilities for humans, because hidden within these creatures may be clues about healing that human biology once possessed more strongly in distant evolutionary history. Human beings still retain faint echoes of regenerative power. The liver can regrow substantial portions of itself after injury. Young children occasionally regenerate damaged fingertips under certain conditions. Bone continuously repairs and reshapes itself throughout life. But compared to some organisms, human healing remains imperfect. Scars remain. Damage accumulates. Time leaves visible marks. Perhaps this imperfection is part of why scars carry such emotional weight in human culture. A scar is both evidence of injury and evidence of survival. Ancient warriors displayed scars as symbols of endurance. Surgeons study them as records of tissue repair. Writers and artists use them as metaphors for memory itself. The body remembers where it has been hurt, and healing leaves traces behind. If you look closely at healed skin beneath soft light, scar tissue often appears slightly different from surrounding tissue. The collagen fibers align differently. Sweat glands may not fully return. Hair may never regrow in exactly the same way. The repaired area becomes its own landscape, a biological memory written quietly into the body. Memory itself may function similarly inside the brain. Neuroscientists now understand that memories are not stored like fixed files hidden inside specific locations. Instead, memories appear to exist through networks of connections spread across many regions of the brain. Each time a memory is recalled, it becomes briefly flexible again before being stored once more. In other words, remembering slightly changes memory itself. The mind is not static. It is continuously rewriting parts of its own internal world. This may help explain why emotional healing often feels so gradual and difficult to measure. The brain does not simply erase painful experiences. Instead, over time, new associations form around old memories. Fear responses weaken, context changes, meaning evolves. The memory remains, but its emotional atmosphere shifts, like weather changing around an old building. And sleep appears deeply involved in this process. During certain sleep stages, the brain replays patterns of neural activity associated with learning, memory, and emotional processing. Some researchers believe dreams may partly help the brain integrate difficult experiences into broader emotional understanding. Others suggest dreaming allows the nervous system to simulate threats safely, preparing humans for future challenges. No one fully knows why dreams exist. Even now, after centuries of study, dreaming remains partly mysterious. But what scientists do know is this: sleep deprivation disrupts healing profoundly. Wounds heal more slowly. Emotional regulation worsens. Immune function declines. Pain sensitivity increases. The brain struggles to process memories effectively. Sleep is not passive rest. It is active biological restoration. Perhaps this explains why exhausted people often describe sleep as healing even when no illness is present. Beneath awareness, the body uses darkness and unconsciousness as opportunities for maintenance. Hormones rebalance. Neural connections reorganize. Muscles relax deeply enough for repair to accelerate. Night becomes medicine, and throughout human history, people have sensed this intuitively. Ancient myths often portrayed sleep as sacred territory bordering life, death, and transformation. In Greek mythology, Hypnos, the god of sleep, lived in a silent cave where night flowers grew and rivers murmured softly through darkness. In many traditions, dreams were viewed not merely as illusions, but as journeys into deeper layers of reality. Even modern hospitals understand something important about nighttime healing. Lights dim. Noise is reduced. Sleep is protected whenever possible, because recovery depends not only on intervention, but on conditions that allow the body to restore itself. Stillness matters. Quiet matters. Safety matters. The nervous system responds profoundly to environment. When humans perceive danger, the body shifts into survival mode. Heart rate rises, muscles tense, stress hormones flood the bloodstream. Attention narrows toward potential threats. This response evolved to protect early humans from predators, violence, and environmental hazards. But in the modern world, The nervous system often reacts similarly to psychological stress, financial fear, social isolation, chronic anxiety, constant digital stimulation. The body struggles to distinguish between physical danger and emotional threat. And prolonged stress changes healing itself. Inflammation remains elevated. Sleep becomes lighter. Digestion weakens. Recovery slows. In a sense, the body heals best when it feels safe enough to stop preparing constantly for catastrophe. This may be one reason why certain spaces feel immediately calming to humans. Libraries late at night, rain against windows, candlelight, soft conversation, the distant sound of ocean waves. These environments reduce sensory threat signals and allow the nervous system to soften its vigilance. For thousands of years, humans healed within protected communal spaces, around fires, inside shelters, beside trusted companions. Safety was rarely solitary, and modern medicine increasingly recognizes how powerful social connection can be in recovery. Patients with strong social support often experience better health outcomes across many conditions. Loneliness, meanwhile, correlates with increased stress, cardiovascular strain, depression, and even shortened lifespan. The body responds biologically to isolation. Humans are deeply social organisms. Even the simple presence of another calm person can influence breathing patterns, heart rhythms, and emotional regulation. Infants regulate stress through physical closeness with caregivers. Adults continue reflecting one another's emotional states in subtle neurological ways through systems involving mirror neurons and unconscious physiological synchronization. In quiet ways, human beings help regulate each other's nervous systems constantly. Perhaps healing has never been entirely individual. Even in the most advanced hospitals on Earth, recovery often still depends partly on ordinary human acts. Reassurance, listening, touch, companionship, patience. Technology can repair arteries, transplant organs, eliminate infections, and image the living brain in astonishing detail. Yet the emotional experience of healing remains profoundly ancient. A frightened patient still seeks comfort. A grieving person still longs to be understood. A tired mind still relaxes most deeply in the presence of safety. And somewhere beneath all modern medicine, beneath every laboratory and surgical instrument, healing continues following rhythms far older than civilization itself. Rhythms carried quietly through blood, sleep, memory, breath, and time. There is a peculiar moment that sometimes arrives during recovery from illness, when a person first notices they are becoming well again, not fully healed, not suddenly transformed, just slightly different. Food begins tasting stronger. Morning light feels less harsh. Breathing becomes easier without conscious effort. Fatigue loosens its grip by small degrees. The world, which had narrowed during sickness, quietly begins expanding outward once more. Often, the change is subtle enough to go unnoticed at first. Healing tends to return life gradually. This gradualness can make recovery strangely difficult to perceive while it is happening. Human attention is naturally drawn toward disruption, pain, danger, uncertainty. The nervous system notices injury immediately because survival depends upon it, but repair unfolds slowly, sometimes beneath awareness entirely. A cut closes millimeter by millimeter. Inflammation fades molecule by molecule. New neural pathways strengthen connection by connection. The body heals through accumulation of tiny, invisible changes. Nature operates similarly on larger scales. Mountains erode grain by grain. Rivers alter landscapes over centuries. Forests spread through patient growth almost impossible to observe in real time. Yet over decades, entire ecosystems transform. Healing belongs to this slower category of change. Perhaps this is why modern life often struggles to understand it fully. Contemporary culture moves quickly. Information arrives instantly. Problems are expected to produce immediate solutions, but biological recovery still obeys older rhythms, shaped long before technology existed. Bones require weeks to knit themselves together. Nerves may require months. Emotional healing may unfold across years. Inside hospitals, rehabilitation centers, and quiet homes around the world, millions of people spend enormous stretches of time waiting for tissues, brains, and bodies to do what they can only do slowly, and slowness itself can become psychologically difficult. Studies in neuroscience suggest that uncertainty may be more stressful to the human brain than known hardship. When outcomes remain unclear, the mind continues scanning for answers, attempting to predict the future. This is one reason long recoveries can feel emotionally exhausting. The body may be healing correctly while the mind struggles with the inability to control or accelerate the process. Yet healing has never been entirely controllable. Even the most skilled physicians often describe medicine as partly an art of creating conditions in which the body can recover more effectively. Antibiotics assist immune systems. Surgery repairs structural damage. Therapy reshapes mental patterns, but beneath these interventions, the organism itself still performs the actual work of adaptation and repair. In many ways, medicine collaborates with biology rather than replacing it. This partnership between human knowledge and natural healing processes has transformed civilization. Diseases that once devastated entire populations can now be treated or prevented. Infections that killed millions throughout history became manageable after the discovery of penicillin. Organ transplantation, once unimaginable, now allows hearts, lungs, kidneys, and livers to continue functioning inside entirely different bodies. And yet these miracles remain fragile. A transplanted organ survives only because the immune system is carefully guided not to attack it. Antibiotics lose effectiveness when bacteria evolve resistance. Cancer treatments often depend on delicate balances between destroying harmful cells and protecting healthy tissue. Healing is rarely simple. The deeper scientists look into biology, the more complexity they discover. Consider inflammation, for example. For centuries, inflammation was viewed mostly as a problem to suppress. Redness, swelling, heat, pain, obvious signs of bodily distress. But modern immunology revealed something more nuanced. Inflammation is not merely damage. It is also communication, a coordinated biological response designed to isolate threats and initiate repair. Without inflammation, wounds would not heal properly. But too much inflammation can damage tissues and contribute to disease. The body exists in careful balance between reaction and restraint. This balance appears throughout nature. Too little immune response allows infection to spread. Too much can become destructive. Too little emotional sensitivity can create detachment. Too much can overwhelm the nervous system. Even ecosystems rely on balance between growth and limitation. Life survives not through perfection, but through continuous adjustment. Perhaps this is one reason healing often feels emotionally meaningful beyond its biological function. Recovery reminds humans that stability is never fixed. The body is always adapting to changing circumstances, responding moment by moment to environments both external and internal. You are not the same organism you were this morning. Cells have already died and been replaced. Hormone levels have shifted. Memories have subtly changed. Tiny repairs have already occurred. The living body is astonishingly dynamic beneath its outward appearance of continuity. Scientists estimate that every second, millions of cells inside the human body die. This sounds alarming until one realizes millions more are also being created. Death and renewal coexist continuously within ordinary life. The body maintains itself through cycles of destruction and replacement happening too quickly and too small to notice consciously. Even the immune system depends partly on selective destruction. Certain cells self-destruct intentionally when damaged beyond repair, preventing greater harm to surrounding tissues. This process, called apoptosis, is so essential that without it, complex organisms could not function properly. In a strange way, healing sometimes requires controlled forms of ending. The forest sheds leaves. The body removes damaged cells. The brain weakens unused neural connections. Life remains healthy partly because it knows how to let certain things go. This principle extends into psychology as well. Emotional healing often involves gradual release, not forgetting entirely, but loosening the nervous system's constant attachment to pain or fear. Therapists sometimes describe trauma recovery not as erasing memory, but reducing the body's automatic alarm response surrounding it. The past remains real, but the body learns it no longer needs to stay permanently prepared for the same danger. Remarkably, the brain can physically change during this process. Neuroimaging studies show measurable differences in brain activity before and after successful treatment for anxiety, depression, and trauma-related conditions. Meditation, therapy, social connection, exercise, sleep, and medication can all influence neural circuitry over time. Thought itself leaves biological traces. Experience reshapes structure. The boundary between mind and body grows increasingly difficult to separate the more closely science examines it. Even belief can influence healing in fascinating ways. The placebo effect, often misunderstood as imaginary improvement, reflects real physiological changes triggered by expectation and context. Under certain conditions, belief alone can alter pain perception, hormone release, immune activity, and brain chemistry. This does not mean illness is imagined. Far from it. Rather, it reveals how deeply perception and biology interact. The brain is not merely observing the body from a distance. It participates continuously in regulating bodily experience. Pain itself is more complicated than once believed. Scientists now understand pain is not produced solely at the site of injury. The brain actively constructs the experience using signals, memory, emotion, expectation, and context. Two people with similar injuries may experience pain very differently depending on stress, fear, previous experiences, and environment. Healing, therefore, unfolds not only in tissues, but in perception. And perhaps nowhere is this more mysterious than in the phenomenon of phantom limbs. Some amputees continue feeling sensations in limbs that no longer physically exist. They may experience itching, warmth, pressure, even pain from absent hands or legs. The brain's internal map of the body persists beyond the body itself. It is a haunting reminder that human experience is partly constructed inside the nervous system. A living model of reality continuously updated, corrected, and sometimes confused. The brain heals too, but like all healing, it does so gradually, quietly, and often in darkness beyond conscious awareness. In the early 20th century, a neurologist named Santiago Ramon y Cajal spent long nights studying delicate structures hidden inside the brain through a microscope. At the time, many scientists believed the nervous system was fixed and unchangeable after childhood. Damage to the brain, they assumed, was largely permanent. But Cajal saw something different, tiny branching forms reaching toward one another like trees in darkness. Complex networks constantly exchanging signals through microscopic gaps later called synapses. Even then, he suspected the brain possessed greater adaptability than people understood. More than a century later, neuroscience continues proving how remarkably flexible the human brain truly is. Stroke patients sometimes regain lost abilities through rehabilitation as healthy regions reorganize functions once controlled elsewhere. Blind individuals often develop heightened sensory processing in other systems. Musicians physically strengthen neural pathways through years of repetition. Taxi drivers navigating large cities develop measurable changes in regions associated with spatial memory. The brain reshapes itself according to experience. Healing can involve rewiring. There is something quietly hopeful about this, though neuroscience itself rarely speaks in emotional language. The nervous system is not static machinery. It is living tissue capable of adaptation throughout life. Not infinitely, not perfectly, but far more than earlier generations imagined. And still, many aspects of healing remain mysterious even to modern science. Consider pain again. Two soldiers may receive similar injuries in battle, yet report dramatically different levels of suffering depending on context. One may feel overwhelming agony. Another, focused entirely on survival, may barely notice the injury until later. This phenomenon puzzled researchers for decades because it suggested pain was not simply a direct response to physical damage. The brain interprets pain according to meaning. Fear amplifies it. Safety can soften it. Attention alters it. This realization transformed medicine's understanding of suffering itself. Pain became recognized not merely as a signal traveling through nerves, but as an experience constructed through complex interactions between body, brain, memory, and emotion. Even chronic pain sometimes persists after tissues have healed, as if the nervous system has learned the pattern too deeply and continues generating alarm signals long after immediate danger has passed. The body remembers, but sometimes memory itself requires healing. This is partly why therapies involving movement, breathing, touch, and gradual exposure can help certain chronic conditions. They do not simply target muscles or joints. They help teach the nervous system new interpretations of safety and threat. Breathing alone has profound effects on the body. Slow, controlled breathing influences the vagus nerve, a major communication pathway linking the brain with the heart, lungs, and digestive organs. As breathing slows, heart rate often softens, muscles relax, stress responses decrease. Long before neuroscience described these mechanisms, ancient cultures had already developed breathing practices connected to healing, contemplation, and emotional regulation. Across India, China, Greece, and many indigenous traditions, breath was understood not merely as air exchange, but as something intimately tied to vitality itself. Modern physiology now confirms at least part of this intuition. The rhythm of breathing changes the rhythm of the nervous system, and rhythms matter deeply in human biology. Circadian rhythms regulate sleep and hormone release according to cycles of light and darkness. Heart rhythms shift according to emotion and activity. Brain waves fluctuate through different states of consciousness. Menstrual cycles alter physiology across time. Even immune activity appears influenced by daily biological clocks. The body is not mechanically constant. It moves in patterns. Perhaps healing does too. Some recoveries happen suddenly. A fever breaks overnight. A wound closes cleanly. An infection disappears after treatment. But many forms of healing behave more like tides. Progress and exhaustion alternate. Symptoms improve, then briefly return. Strength rebuilds unevenly. Patients recovering from major illness often describe this surprising rhythm. One day brings energy and optimism. The next brings fatigue and frustration. Recovery curves rarely move in perfect straight lines. Nature rarely does. Ocean waves advance and retreat. Seasons cycle between growth and dormancy. Forests regenerate unevenly after fires. Human biology evolved within these fluctuating environments, and perhaps healing still reflects that older natural logic. There is also a strange intimacy to illness that healthy people sometimes forget. When the body suffers, attention narrows inward. A person becomes intensely aware of breathing, heartbeat, temperature, appetite, pain, exhaustion. Ordinary bodily functions suddenly feel fragile and significant. Health, when present, often feels invisible. You rarely notice a painless knee while walking comfortably. You rarely think about swallowing until a sore throat makes it difficult. The body disappears into the background when functioning smoothly. Illness returns it sharply into awareness. And perhaps this awareness partly explains why many philosophical traditions became deeply connected to healing practices. Sickness confronts humans with dependence, mortality, limitation, and uncertainty, questions that medicine alone cannot entirely answer. Ancient Buddhist texts observed that all living beings are vulnerable to aging, illness, and death. Stoic philosophers in ancient Rome reflected constantly on the fragility of the body and the importance of responding calmly to what cannot be fully controlled. Across cultures, healing traditions often merged practical medicine with larger reflections about existence itself, not because suffering is beautiful, but because vulnerability reveals something fundamental about being alive. Every human body is temporary. Every organism eventually reaches limits beyond which repair can no longer continue indefinitely. And yet life persists in trying. Perhaps nowhere is this persistence more moving than in the healing of children. A child's body often recovers with astonishing speed. Bones mend rapidly. Skin repairs efficiently. Neural adaptability remains extraordinarily high during early development. Scientists believe this regenerative capacity partly reflects evolutionary priorities. Young organisms require flexible growth systems capable of responding quickly to changing environments. But beyond biology, people across cultures react emotionally to the healing of children in profound ways. A recovering child often symbolizes renewal itself, life continuing despite danger, fragility, or loss. In pediatric hospitals, the atmosphere can feel uniquely emotional for this reason. Small acts of recovery carry enormous emotional weight. A child eating again after illness, sleeping peacefully after pain, laughing for the first time in days. Tiny signs become monumental, and perhaps this reflects a broader truth about healing in general. Recovery often announces itself quietly, not through dramatic revelation, but through ordinary moments returning. The first walk outside after confinement indoors. The return of appetite, a deeper breath, a night of uninterrupted sleep. The realization that fear is no longer occupying every thought. Healing restores familiarity to the world, and yet complete healing, in the purest sense, may be rarer than humans sometimes imagine. Most lives accumulate scars, adaptations, losses, compensations, and changes over time. Bodies age, memories linger. Certain wounds alter people permanently, but perhaps healing was never meant to erase history entirely. Perhaps it means learning how life continues carrying history forward. In some forests, researchers have discovered trees connected through vast underground fungal networks, sometimes called the wood wide web. Thin filaments beneath the soil carry nutrients and chemical signals between roots across surprising distances. Older trees may even support younger ones by transferring resources through these hidden pathways during periods of stress. For centuries, forests appeared to humans as collections of separate organisms standing quietly beside one another. Now they appear more interconnected than anyone realized. Healing may also depend more on connection than isolation. Inside the human body, no system truly functions alone. The immune system communicates constantly with the nervous system. Hormones influence mood, metabolism, and inflammation simultaneously. Gut bacteria affect digestion, immunity, and even aspects of emotional regulation through chemical signaling pathways researchers are only beginning to understand. The body behaves less like separate organs assembled together and more like an ecosystem, a living conversation. Trillions of microorganisms inhabit the human body at all times. Most are harmless. Many are beneficial. Entire microbial communities line the digestive tract, helping break down food, produce vitamins, regulate inflammation, and influence immune development from infancy onward. In a sense, human beings are not singular organisms at all. They are collaborative biological worlds, and healing often depends on maintaining balance within these invisible internal ecosystems. Modern medicine has increasingly recognized this complexity. Antibiotics save lives, yet they can also disrupt beneficial microbial populations. Chronic stress alters immune activity and digestion simultaneously. Sleep deprivation affects metabolism, emotional regulation, inflammation, and cardiovascular function all at once. Everything influences everything else. The deeper science examines life, the less isolated any process appears. Even emotions leave physical signatures throughout the body. Fear accelerates heartbeat and breathing. Grief changes appetite and sleep. Relief softens muscle tension almost immediately. Embarrassment warms the skin through expanding blood vessels. Love and attachment alter neurochemistry in measurable ways involving oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, and countless other signaling molecules. Human feelings are not abstractions floating separately from biology. They are embodied experiences. This may explain why certain memories can trigger physical sensations decades later. A familiar scent suddenly evokes childhood with startling clarity. An old song changes heart rate and emotional state within seconds. The nervous system stores patterns linking sensation, memory, and emotion together across time, and healing often unfolds through these same pathways. Music therapy, for example, has shown measurable benefits in patients with neurological injuries and degenerative diseases. Rhythm can help Parkinson's patients improve movement coordination. Familiar songs sometimes awaken memories in individuals with dementia who otherwise struggle to recognize loved ones. Somewhere within the damaged brain, music still finds pathways through. There is something deeply moving about that. Perhaps because music itself resembles healing in certain ways. Both unfold through rhythm, timing, repetition, tension, and release. Both affect the nervous system directly. Both can alter breathing, emotional state, and perception of time. Lullabies exist in nearly every human culture. Long before scientific understanding of infant development, humans instinctively used rhythm and soft vocal tones to calm distressed nervous systems. A parent rocking a child beside firelight thousands of years ago was participating in biological regulation long before neuroscience could describe it. Healing knowledge often begins as observation before becoming science. People notice what helps. Warmth eases pain. Rest restores strength. Gentle touch calms fear. Safety improves recovery. Then slowly, across generations, understanding deepens. One of the most fascinating examples of this process involves the placebo effect and its lesser-known counterpart, the nocebo effect. If expectation of healing can improve symptoms under certain conditions, expectation of harm can worsen them. Patients warned extensively about side effects sometimes experience those symptoms more frequently, even when receiving inactive treatments. Belief alters biology, not infinitely, not magically, but measurably. The brain continuously predicts reality using prior experience and expectation. Modern neuroscience increasingly views perception itself as partly predictive. The brain constructs models of the world and constantly updates them according to incoming information. Healing may involve changing some of these internal predictions. A traumatized nervous system predicts danger constantly. A recovering nervous system slowly relearns safety. This relearning takes time because survival systems evolved to prioritize caution. From an evolutionary perspective, a brain that remembers danger too strongly is often safer than one that forgets too easily. And yet living permanently in survival mode carries enormous costs. Sleep deteriorates, inflammation rises, attention narrows, joy becomes difficult to access. In recent decades, researchers studying trauma discovered that overwhelming experiences can become physiologically embedded in ways far deeper than ordinary memory. Certain sounds, environments, or sensations may trigger full-body alarm responses years after danger has ended. The body reacts as though the past is still happening. But remarkably, healing can reshape these responses through gradual exposure to safety, connection, movement, therapy, and time. Neural pathways weaken when no longer reinforced constantly. The nervous system learns through repetition that not every reminder leads to catastrophe. Fear softens slowly, like ice melting beneath spring sunlight. Perhaps one reason healing feels emotionally powerful is because it reveals the body's capacity for change. Humans are not fixed creatures. Biology remains adaptive throughout life. Habits alter brain structure, exercise strengthens cardiovascular systems, meditation changes patterns of neural activity, chronic loneliness harms health, while meaningful social bonds appear protective in ways still being studied. The organism responds continuously to experience. Even hope may carry biological effects. Not simplistic optimism, but genuine expectation that survival and improvement remain possible. Studies suggest patients who maintain a sense of meaning, connection, or future orientation during illness often cope more effectively with pain and stress. The brain's interpretation of circumstances influences hormonal responses, immune activity, and resilience. Ancient healers understood this intuitively, even without modern terminology. Ceremonies, rituals, prayers, and communal gatherings often served psychological as well as spiritual functions. They reduced isolation, created meaning, organized fear into shared narratives, helped frightened people feel held within larger structures of understanding. Modern medicine excels at physical intervention, yet humans still seek meaning during illness because suffering raises questions beyond biology alone. Why does vulnerability exist? Why must living organisms age? Why do some recover while others do not? Science can explain mechanisms with extraordinary precision, but existential questions remain quieter and more difficult. Perhaps this is why healing stories continue appearing throughout mythology, religion, literature, and art across civilizations. They touch something universal in human experience. Every person eventually encounters bodily fragility in some form. Injury, illness, grief, exhaustion, aging. Healing becomes one of the great shared human experiences. Tonight, Somewhere in the world, a patient is waking after surgery while anesthetic slowly fades. Somewhere else, a fever is finally breaking after days of illness. A child's scraped knee is already rebuilding skin beneath a bandage. Bones are mending inside sleeping bodies. Damaged muscles are strengthening after exercise. Neural pathways are reorganizing after emotional pain, and all of it is happening mostly without awareness, quietly, gradually, cell by cell. There is something almost comforting about realizing how much care exists within living systems themselves. Not conscious care exactly, but biological persistence, ancient evolutionary intelligence continuously working against entropy and injury. Life protects life from within, even in darkness, even during sleep, even when the conscious mind has surrendered entirely to dreams. And even in dreams, the mind does not fully leave healing behind. Sleep is often imagined as absence, a temporary withdrawal from the world, but the brain behaves more like a carefully maintained workshop in the dark. Neural activity does not stop. It changes rhythm. It slows in some regions while becoming strangely active in others. Memory traces are replayed, reorganized, and sometimes reclassified in ways researchers are still trying to fully map. There are nights when the sleeping brain appears to rehearse the day, quietly sorting through fragments of experience as though deciding what should be kept, what should fade, and what should be integrated into something larger. This is not always comfortable from the inside. Dreams can carry echoes of stress, unresolved emotion, or unfamiliar combinations of memory. Yet beneath the surface of imagery and narrative, something quieter may be happening. Emotional intensity is sometimes reduced, associations are reshaped, the sharp edges of experience are softened just enough to become more manageable upon waking. It is as if the mind is gently adjusting the volume of life, not erasing it, just lowering its weight. Meanwhile, the body beneath this mental activity is undergoing its own deep restoration. During certain phases of sleep, heart rate slows into a steadier rhythm. Blood pressure decreases, muscles release tension that may have accumulated unnoticed during waking hours. Hormonal systems shift toward repair and growth, favoring processes that restore tissue over those that prepare for immediate action. Growth hormone pulses more strongly during these periods, supporting cellular repair and regeneration. At the same time, stress-related hormones tend to decline, allowing systems that were previously on alert to relax their vigilance. It is a delicate rebalancing, repeated night after night, a quiet biological reset that has been refined over millions of years of evolution. Even the immune system changes its behavior during sleep. Certain immune cells become more active, improving their ability to detect and respond to threats. Inflammation is regulated in complex ways that support healing without overwhelming surrounding tissues. The body seems to use sleep as an opportunity to coordinate defenses more efficiently, as though reorganizing its internal resources while external demands are absent. In modern life, this process is easily underestimated. People often think of sleep as something to be minimized or sacrificed, as if it were a pause in productivity rather than a core requirement for survival. But from a biological perspective, sleep is not optional maintenance. It is one of the primary conditions under which healing becomes possible at scale. Without it, the entire system begins to lose coherence. Attention becomes fragmented, emotions become harder to regulate, physical recovery slows, even perception of pain can intensify. The body begins to behave as though it is operating under continuous low-level emergency, and yet the solution is not complexity. It is return. Return to cycles that existed long before artificial lighting, digital screens, or modern schedules disrupted natural rhythms of rest and activity. There is a reason so many healing traditions emphasize rest as foundational rather than secondary. Long before sleep science existed, cultures understood that recovery required withdrawal from stimulation, from effort, from constant engagement with the external world. Healing often begins when input decreases, when the nervous system is no longer required to process endless streams of information. It can redirect energy inward. Repair processes become more efficient when not competing with alertness or stress responses. Even in hospitals, where technology is advanced and intervention is constant, The importance of quiet recovery spaces is increasingly recognized. Reduced noise, controlled lighting, and minimal disturbance are not luxuries. They are part of the healing environment itself, because the nervous system is always listening, even when the body is resting, even when the mind is drifting between sleep and wakefulness. There is a subtle threshold during recovery that many people describe, but few can easily define. A moment when the body stops feeling like it is actively fighting and begins feeling like it is simply existing again. Pain may still be present, but it no longer dominates awareness. Exhaustion begins to lift in small increments. The future no longer feels entirely suspended by illness. This shift is rarely dramatic. It arrives quietly, like dawn light spreading across a room before anyone notices the sun has risen. And once it begins, it tends to continue in uneven steps rather than a smooth curve. Some days feel better than others. Progress is rarely linear. The body may improve in one system while another lags behind. Energy may return before strength fully does. Appetite may come back before stamina recovers. Healing rarely synchronizes all systems at once. It negotiates with them individually. This unevenness can be confusing, especially when compared to mechanical repair where parts are replaced or fixed in predictable sequences. But biological systems are not mechanical in that sense. They are adaptive, interdependent, and constantly adjusting to internal feedback. A change in one region influences many others. Modern physiology increasingly views the body as a network of dynamic relationships rather than a collection of isolated organs. The heart influences the brain through rhythmic signals. The gut influences immunity through microbial and chemical interactions. The brain influences nearly everything through hormonal and nervous pathways. Healing, therefore, is never localized in a truly simple way. A wound on the surface of the skin still involves immune signaling, blood flow regulation, emotional interpretation of pain, and even behavioral changes that protect the injured area from further stress. Everything participates. Even rest itself is active participation. There is also a deeper dimension to healing that science observes but cannot easily translate into measurement. Patients recovering from serious illness often describe a shift in perception over time, not necessarily a change in external reality, but a subtle reorganization of what feels important. Minor irritations lose significance. Small moments gain clarity. Time feels different. The body becomes more central in awareness again, but in a quieter way than during illness. It is as though recovery does not only restore function, but also recalibrates attention. Some neuroscientists suggest that this may relate to changes in how the brain assigns value to sensory and emotional input. Survival states tend to amplify threat detection. Recovery states gradually restore balance between vigilance and openness. The world becomes less narrow, more spacious, less urgent, more observable. And perhaps this is one of the most understated aspects of healing. It is not only about returning to a previous condition, but about altering the way experience itself is organized. A person who has recovered from illness does not simply return to life unchanged. Even if the body appears fully restored, something in the relationship with the body may have shifted. Awareness of fragility may remain, appreciation for ordinary functioning may deepen, or sometimes a quiet uncertainty about stability lingers beneath everyday activities. Healing leaves subtle traces in consciousness, not always dramatic, but persistent, like faint lines in memory that remain after a drawing has been erased. And yet, despite all of this complexity, despite all the systems involved, despite all the unknowns still surrounding biology and consciousness, healing continues in every living body, with remarkable consistency, not perfectly, not uniformly, but persistently enough to sustain life across every environment humans inhabit. From cities filled with artificial light to quiet rural landscapes where night still feels vast and uninterrupted, the same internal processes continue beneath skin, bone, and thought, repairing, adjusting, restoring, and preparing the organism for another day of fragile, temporary, and quietly astonishing existence. There is a moment in recovery when silence begins to feel different. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence that returns after noise has been slowly reduced, after pain has lessened, after the body is no longer constantly signaling distress. In that silence, ordinary sensations begin to reappear with subtle clarity. The weight of blankets, the distant rhythm of breathing, the faint awareness of temperature in the room. These details were always present. They were simply overshadowed. Healing, in many ways, is not only the repair of tissue or the resolution of illness, it is also the gradual return of perception to a broader field of experience. When suffering dominates, attention narrows almost automatically. The nervous system prioritizes threat detection above all else. But as recovery progresses, that narrow focus begins to widen again. The world becomes more than the body in crisis. It becomes environment once more. This widening is gentle. It rarely arrives with certainty. Instead, it appears in fragments. A brief moment of ease between waves of fatigue, a conversation that feels slightly less effortful than the day before, a stretch of time in which pain is present but no longer central. These small shifts are often how healing is recognized from the inside, not as a declaration, but as comparison, the present compared to what came before. Modern neuroscience suggests that the brain is constantly engaged in this kind of comparison. It evaluates current sensory input against past experience, continuously adjusting predictions about what the body is feeling and what it is likely to feel next. In recovery, these predictions slowly begin to change. Pain becomes less expected, fatigue becomes less dominant, safety becomes more plausible again. And as predictions shift, perception follows. This relationship between expectation and sensation is one of the most subtle aspects of healing. The body is not simply receiving signals from the world. It is interpreting them through layers of memory, emotion, and prior learning. A touch can feel comforting or alarming depending on context. A heartbeat can feel reassuring in calm states or unsettling during anxiety. Even breathing can become a focus of discomfort when attention turns inward under stress. Healing often involves restoring neutrality to these signals, allowing sensation to exist without constant interpretation as threat. There is also something deeply physical about emotional recovery that is often overlooked. After prolonged stress or illness, the body does not immediately return to baseline. Muscles may remain slightly tense, sleep patterns may remain irregular. Digestion may take time to stabilize. Hormonal systems may continue adjusting for days, weeks, or even longer depending on severity of disruption. The body remembers states of strain and gradually unlearns them. This unlearning is not passive. It requires repeated experiences of safety, moments in which the nervous system receives consistent evidence that immediate danger has passed. Over time, these moments accumulate into new patterns of regulation. Breathing slows more easily. Heart rate variability increases. Sleep becomes deeper. Energy becomes more stable. But even as stability returns, healing does not erase the history of what occurred. Instead, it incorporates it. The body does not revert to an untouched version of itself. It becomes something slightly different, shaped by what it has endured. This is especially visible in long-term recovery from serious illness or injury. People often describe a sense that they have been subtly reorganized, not only physically but internally. Priorities shift, awareness of time changes. The body is no longer taken entirely for granted. Even ordinary health begins to feel like a kind of presence, something quietly noticeable when it returns. Across history, this realization has appeared in many forms. Philosophers and physicians alike have noted that illness often reveals what health hides. When the body functions smoothly, it disappears into the background of experience. When it breaks down, it becomes central, and in recovery, there is a transition period where both states overlap. The body is no longer fully broken, but not yet fully invisible again. It exists in awareness, and that awareness can feel strangely intimate. Some medical researchers describe healing as a process of reintegration. The body, the mind, and daily life gradually reassemble into a coherent whole after disruption. This reintegration is not only biological, it is also behavioral and emotional. Routines return, confidence slowly rebuilds, movement becomes less cautious, fear diminishes in small increments. Even identity can shift subtly during long recoveries. A person may begin to see themselves differently after experiencing vulnerability or dependence. The experience of needing care can alter how one perceives strength, limitation, and resilience, yet none of this unfolds in isolation. Healing is always influenced by surroundings. Light, sound, temperature, social presence, and emotional context all shape the trajectory of recovery in ways that are still being studied. A calm environment can reduce stress hormones. Gentle interaction can stabilize mood. Consistent routines can support physiological regulation. The body is responsive not only to internal processes, but to external atmosphere. This is why certain spaces feel inherently restorative. A quiet room with soft light, a familiar home environment, the presence of calm voices. Even the absence of urgency itself can shift the nervous system toward repair. Time behaves differently in such spaces. It stops feeling like something to endure and becomes something to inhabit. There is also a quiet paradox within healing that appears repeatedly across biology. The systems responsible for maintaining life often require conditions of reduced activity in order to function optimally. The immune system operates most effectively when the body is not under constant stress. Tissue repair accelerates during rest. Neural reorganization deepens during sleep. In other words, much of healing depends on not doing, on allowing processes that are already in motion to continue without interruption. This can be difficult in a culture that values constant activity and visible progress. But biological systems do not respond to urgency in the same way human intention does. They respond to conditions: safety, rest, stability, time. And under those conditions, they move with quiet persistence toward repair. Even now, as this moment continues, countless microscopic processes are unfolding inside every living body. Proteins are folding into precise shapes. Cells are dividing and replacing older ones. Immune cells are scanning for irregularities. Neural pathways are subtly adjusting their strength based on recent experience. None of it requires attention. None of it waits for awareness. It simply continues. And perhaps one of the most remarkable aspects of healing is that it does not require understanding in order to occur. A person does not need to know how collagen fibers align in order for a wound to close. The heart does not require conscious direction to maintain rhythm. The brain does not need instruction to regulate temperature, balance hormones, or repair cellular damage. Life carries within itself the instructions for its own continuation, and healing is one of its most enduring expressions, not as a single event, but as an ongoing condition, a quiet, continuous effort within every living system to remain, to adapt, and to return, again and again, to a state where life can continue unfolding. There is a point in long recovery where the idea of returning to normal begins to feel less important. At first, people often imagine healing as a reversal, a path back to a previous version of the body, a previous rhythm of life, a previous sense of certainty. But over time, something more subtle becomes apparent. The body does not truly travel backward. It moves forward through whatever has already occurred. Even when recovery is complete in a clinical sense, there is still a kind of continuity of experience that cannot be undone. The nervous system has registered what happened. The immune system has adapted. The mind has formed associations between sensation, time, and vulnerability. So healing becomes less about restoration of a past state and more about integration into a present one, a new kind of stability. This shift is not always consciously noticed. It often emerges slowly, like background light changing throughout the day. A person may realize one morning that they are no longer scanning their body constantly for signs of distress, or that sleep no longer feels like a fragile achievement, or that movement no longer requires negotiation with discomfort. These realizations are often quiet, almost ordinary, and yet they mark a profound transition in the internal landscape of the body, from survival to continuation, from vigilance to presence. Inside the nervous system, this transition corresponds with gradual recalibration. Stress circuits that were once highly active begin to quiet. Systems involved in threat detection reduce their baseline sensitivity. Hormonal rhythms stabilize. The body becomes less reactive, more responsive, not numb, not disconnected, but less governed by alarm. This change can feel unfamiliar at first. After prolonged periods of illness or stress, heightened awareness of the body may become a default state. When that intensity begins to fade, some people describe a strange emptiness, as though something important is missing. But what is actually missing is constant urgency, and in its place, something else becomes available again: background life. The simple experience of existing without immediate biological alarm, breathing without monitoring it, sitting without interpreting every sensation, moving without calculation. It is in this space that many forms of healing become most visible, not because they are dramatic, but because they are no longer competing with distress for attention. The body was always repairing itself. It is simply now easier to notice. On a microscopic level, this ongoing repair never truly pauses. Even in moments of apparent stability, the body is continuously engaged in renewal. Cells across different tissues follow their own lifespans. Some last only days, others persist for years, but all are eventually replaced. Skin renews itself gradually from deeper layers. The lining of the gut is rebuilt frequently due to constant exposure to digestive activity. Blood components are continuously produced and recycled. There is a rhythm of replacement embedded into living tissue itself, a quiet cycle of disappearance and return. In many ways, identity within the body is maintained not by permanence, but by continuity of process. You are not composed of fixed matter. You are composed of ongoing change. This is one of the more subtle ideas in modern biology. Stability is not achieved by resisting change, but by organizing it. The body remains recognizably itself precisely because it regulates constant transformation. Healing fits into this pattern seamlessly. It is not an exception to biological life. It is one of its primary expressions. Even scarring, often viewed as imperfect repair, reflects this principle. The body does not restore identical tissue after deep injury. Instead, it builds functional replacement that preserves integrity even if structure differs. The goal is not aesthetic perfection. It is continuation, function over form, survival over symmetry. And yet there is still beauty in this adaptation. Scar tissue tells a quiet history of what the body has endured and managed to overcome. It is not decoration, but record, a kind of biological memory written into physical structure. Similarly, emotional healing leaves its own form of internal record. Experiences that once felt overwhelming may become less physically charged over time, but they are rarely erased entirely. Instead, their influence changes. What once triggered immediate stress responses may later be met with recognition without reactivation. The memory remains, but its effect on the body shifts. This transformation is part of what makes psychological recovery so complex to observe. Unlike a broken bone that can be seen healing on imaging scans, emotional healing is distributed across networks of perception, memory, and regulation. It cannot be located in a single structure. It exists in patterns of response, in how quickly the heart rate settles after stress, in how easily sleep returns after disruption, in how the mind interprets uncertainty. Across all of this, one of the most important factors influencing recovery is repetition of safety. The nervous system learns through experience, not instruction. Each moment of calm without threat reinforces a different expectation of the world. Over time, these moments accumulate. They slowly reshape baseline perception. What once felt unsafe becomes neutral. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. What once felt impossible becomes simply part of life again. This is not a rapid process. It unfolds across days, weeks, sometimes years, and it often happens without explicit awareness. The body does not announce that it is updating its expectations. It simply behaves differently over time. Sleep deepens slightly. Muscles relax more easily. Emotional spikes soften. Breathing becomes less constrained. And gradually, the sense of being constantly on edge begins to dissolve. There is also something quietly profound about the fact that healing often depends on repetition rather than intensity. A single moment of safety is rarely enough to rewire deeply ingrained stress responses, but many small moments, accumulated over time, can reshape the system entirely. A conversation that feels calm, a night of uninterrupted sleep, a meal eaten without discomfort, a walk without pain, a breath that feels unguarded. Each of these may seem insignificant in isolation, but biologically, they contribute to long-term recalibration of the nervous system. Healing is built from ordinary experiences repeated consistently enough to become new reference points for the body. And perhaps this is why recovery often feels slow from the inside. Not because nothing is happening, but because what is happening is distributed across countless small adjustments that do not individually stand out. Meanwhile, beneath conscious awareness, repair systems continue their work with extraordinary precision. Immune cells continue scanning for abnormalities. Hormonal systems continue adjusting internal balance. Neural circuits continue refining their connections based on ongoing experience. The body is never static. Even in stillness, it is active. Even in rest, it is engaged. Even in sleep, it is organizing itself toward continuity. And over time, this continuous activity creates something that feels like wholeness again. Not as a return to what was before, but as a stable integration of everything that has happened since. A body that has healed is not a body that has forgotten injury. It is a body that has learned how to live alongside its history without being defined entirely by it. And in that quiet adaptation, life continues. There is a quiet threshold in healing that often goes unnoticed because nothing dramatic marks its arrival. No clear moment announces it. No single sensation defines it. Yet gradually, the experience of being unwell begins to lose its central position in awareness. It is still remembered. It may still be monitored, but it no longer occupies every layer of attention. Something else returns: ordinary life. The simple continuity of days that no longer need to be measured against pain or disruption. This return is not a reversal. It is not a clean restoration of what existed before. It is more like a widening of perspective after a period of narrowing. During illness or injury, perception often contracts around the body. Sensations become amplified. Time feels dense. Attention repeatedly circles back to discomfort or limitation. But as recovery progresses, that contraction slowly relaxes. The mind begins to open outward again. Sounds in the environment become noticeable. Light changes across a room without being filtered through fatigue or pain. Conversations regain texture. Thoughts begin to move beyond immediate bodily concerns. This widening does not happen all at once. It unfolds in layers, one system at a time, rejoining the background rhythm of life. In physiology, this gradual return corresponds with multiple overlapping adjustments. Inflammation decreases. Energy metabolism stabilizes. Sleep architecture becomes more structured again, with deeper cycles returning more consistently. The autonomic nervous system, which governs involuntary processes like heart rate and digestion, gradually shifts away from stress dominance and back toward balance. It is not a switch, it is a recalibration. And recalibration takes time because every system in the body is linked to others. Change in one domain influences many. As physical stability returns, emotional regulation often becomes easier. As emotional stability improves, physical symptoms may become less pronounced. These feedback loops reinforce recovery in subtle, interconnected ways. Healing, in this sense, is not linear progress through isolated steps. It is a network adjusting itself toward equilibrium. Even the sensation of energy returning is more complex than it appears. Fatigue during illness is not simply lack of rest. It is a regulated biological state influenced by immune signaling, hormonal shifts, metabolic demand, and neurological perception. As recovery advances, these signals gradually recalibrate. The feeling of tiredness may fluctuate before stabilizing again. Some days feel stronger, others unexpectedly slower. This variability is not failure. It is adjustment. The body is testing different levels of function, gradually identifying sustainable balance points. In parallel, the brain is also reorganizing its relationship with effort. During illness or prolonged stress, even small tasks can feel disproportionately demanding. Cognitive load increases, emotional responses become more intense, attention requires greater effort to maintain. As healing progresses, these cognitive systems begin to ease. Thinking feels less strained. Decision-making becomes simpler. Mental fatigue reduces. This cognitive recovery is often as important as physical repair, yet it can be harder to recognize because it unfolds quietly. A person may not notice that concentration has improved until they realize they are no longer losing focus as frequently, or that memory feels more reliable, or that emotional reactions are less overwhelming. These are subtle internal shifts, but they significantly alter the experience of being alive. There is also a deeper psychological layer to healing that emerges when the body begins to stabilize. Awareness of vulnerability often remains. Even after symptoms improve, the memory of illness can linger as a kind of background sensitivity. This is not necessarily negative. It can lead to greater attentiveness to health, boundaries, and rest. But it can also take time for the nervous system to fully trust that stability is sustained. Trust, in biological terms, is not abstract. It is built through repeated evidence of safety, night after night of sleep without disruption, day after day without escalating symptoms, moments of exertion followed by recovery. The accumulation of these experiences gradually reshapes internal prediction systems. The body learns not only that healing has occurred, but that it is continuing. At the cellular level, this continuation is ongoing regardless of perception. Mitochondria within cells continuously produce energy. Proteins are constantly synthesized and broken down. Cellular membranes maintain selective exchange with their environment. DNA repair mechanisms correct microscopic errors that occur during normal metabolic activity. Life, at its most fundamental level, is maintenance under constant change, and healing is simply a heightened expression of that maintenance process. There is something quietly profound in realizing that there is no moment in which the body is entirely finished healing. Even in perfect health, repair processes remain active. Micro-injuries from daily movement are resolved. Environmental stressors are managed. Internal balance is continuously adjusted. Health is not absence of activity. It is coordinated activity that remains within sustainable limits. This perspective changes how recovery itself can be understood. Rather than a journey from brokenness to perfection, it becomes a transition between different states of ongoing maintenance. The body never stops responding. It only shifts how intensely it must respond. In illness, response becomes concentrated. In recovery, response becomes distributed again. Another quiet aspect of healing involves attention itself. During illness, attention often becomes tightly bound to the body. Sensation dominates perception. But as recovery continues, attention gradually re-expands into external life. Small pleasures regain presence. The feel of air entering the lungs without strain, the rhythm of walking without conscious effort, the ability to sit without monitoring discomfort. These experiences may seem simple, but they represent a profound reintegration of bodily ease into awareness. At the same time, emotional recovery often involves subtle shifts in meaning. Experiences that once felt overwhelming may slowly lose their intensity when recalled. This does not necessarily mean forgetting. Rather, it reflects the brain's ability to reorganize emotional associations over time. Memory becomes less reactive, less physically charged, more distant, but also more integrated. This integration allows past experiences to exist without dominating present perception. And in this space, a quieter form of stability emerges. Not the absence of history, but coexistence with it. There is also a broader pattern in nature that mirrors this process. Ecosystems recovering from disruption do not return to identical previous states. Instead, they reorganize. Species composition shifts, new balances form. Stability re-emerges, but in a modified structure. Forests regrow after fire, but not as exact replicas of what existed before. Rivers reshape landscapes as they flow, even while maintaining continuity of movement. Ocean currents adjust after disturbances, finding new equilibrium paths. Healing in biology follows similar principles. It is adaptive restoration, not exact reconstruction. And perhaps this is why recovery can sometimes feel unfamiliar, even when it is complete. The system that emerges after healing is not identical to the system before disruption. It carries the imprint of what it has experienced, yet it functions. It continues. It lives within new conditions of balance. And as this balance stabilizes, attention slowly returns to the broader world again, not as escape from the body, but as reintegration with it. Breathing, sensing, thinking, and existing begin to feel less like separate processes and more like a single continuous experience once again, not perfect, not permanent, but sufficient for life to continue unfolding quietly, moment by moment, through the ongoing and unseen work of healing that never truly stops. There is a stage in healing where the body no longer feels like something being actively repaired, but something simply being lived in again. This shift is subtle, almost imperceptible from day to day. The memory of illness does not vanish, but it stops dominating the present moment. Instead of constantly negotiating with symptoms or limitations, attention begins to drift outward into ordinary experience. The sensation of being in recovery slowly dissolves into the sensation of simply existing. This transition is not a conclusion. It is a reorganization of awareness. The body, having moved through disruption, no longer announces its processes so loudly. Pain signals quiet down. Fatigue becomes less defining. Internal systems continue their work, but beneath a calmer surface. It is not silence born from absence. It is silence born from stability. Inside the physiology of this state, countless adjustments are still underway. Immune activity refines itself, no longer in heightened defense mode but in maintenance and surveillance. Hormonal systems stabilize their cycles. Nervous system activity reduces its oscillation between alertness and exhaustion. Even digestion, often one of the first systems disrupted by stress or illness, begins to regain predictable rhythm. What is striking is not that these systems restart, but that they remember how to settle. Homeostasis is not a fixed condition. It is a continuous negotiation. The body is constantly responding to internal and external changes, making small corrections in real time. Healing simply pushes this regulatory system into a phase of rebuilding equilibrium after disruption. But equilibrium, once restored, does not feel like a destination. It feels like absence of disturbance. This is why recovery is often difficult to describe from the inside. The most noticeable stages are those of imbalance. Pain is distinct, weakness is distinct, fatigue is distinct, but returning balance is quieter. It is defined by the gradual disappearance of extremes rather than the arrival of a new sensation. In neuroscience, this fading of intensity is closely tied to how the brain recalibrates salience. Salience is the system that determines what deserves attention. During illness or injury, bodily signals become highly salient. The brain prioritizes them constantly, ensuring survival-related information is never missed. As healing progresses, salience shifts. The same signals that once demanded constant attention are gradually deprioritized. They do not disappear entirely, but they no longer dominate perception. This is why a person recovering from illness may suddenly realize they have gone minutes or even hours without thinking about their body at all. That absence itself becomes a sign of recovery. Yet beneath this apparent normality, the body continues its quiet labor. Cellular turnover remains constant. Proteins are synthesized and degraded in precise cycles. Neural connections continue to adjust based on ongoing experience. The immune system remains vigilant, scanning for abnormalities without calling attention to itself unless necessary. Nothing in the body is ever truly idle. Even rest is structured activity, and sleep, which often becomes more stable as recovery advances, continues to play a central role. During deeper sleep stages, the brain engages in processes that support both physical and cognitive restoration. Neural networks involved in memory are reactivated and reorganized. Emotional experiences are processed in ways that reduce their raw intensity. The body's repair mechanisms operate with greater efficiency under conditions of reduced external input. Sleep does not simply pause life. It reorganizes it. This is one of the reasons prolonged illness often feels disorienting. When sleep is disrupted, the body loses one of its primary systems for restoration. When sleep stabilizes again, recovery often accelerates in ways that feel almost unexpected. Energy returns not as a sudden surge, but as a gradual re-establishment of internal coherence. Coherence is a useful word here, because healing is less about fixing individual parts than about restoring coordination between them. The heart, lungs, brain, gut, immune system, and endocrine system are not separate machines. They are interdependent processes, constantly communicating through chemical and electrical signals. When one system is disturbed, others adjust. When recovery begins, they gradually return to coordinated rhythm. This coordination is not perfect symmetry. It is dynamic balance, a living equilibrium that adjusts continuously to changing internal states and external environments. Even emotional recovery follows this pattern of re-coordination. Emotional states are not isolated mental events. They are embodied experiences involving physiology, memory, cognition, and perception. As healing progresses, emotional intensity often softens, not because emotions disappear, but because the systems supporting them stabilize. Fear responses become less reactive. Sadness becomes less physically overwhelming. Joy becomes more accessible again, not amplified, just less obstructed. There is also a quiet shift in how time is experienced during recovery. In states of illness or distress, time often feels stretched, heavy, fragmented. Days may feel long but unstructured. Nights may feel restless or incomplete. The future may feel distant or uncertain. As healing progresses, time begins to reassemble. Routines return. Sleep becomes cyclical again. The distinction between day and night becomes clearer. A sense of continuity returns to experience. This temporal stabilization is closely linked to physiological rhythm. Circadian systems, which regulate biological cycles based on light and darkness, gradually regain consistency. Hormones like cortisol and melatonin resume more predictable patterns. The body begins to move in sync with external cycles once more. It is a return not only to health, but to rhythm. And rhythm is one of the most fundamental organizing principles in biology. Heartbeats, breathing, neural oscillations, cellular cycles, all operate through repeating patterns that sustain life over time. Healing is, in part, the restoration of these patterns after disruption. But perhaps the most understated aspect of recovery is how unremarkable it can feel once it is underway. There is no single moment when a person becomes fully healed. Instead, there are countless small confirmations that life is continuing without interruption, waking without immediate distress, eating without difficulty, moving without hesitation, thinking without resistance, sleeping without fear of interruption. Each of these is minor in isolation. Together, they form the experience of stability. And stability, once it returns, often goes unnoticed, precisely because it is no longer disruptive. The nervous system, having spent time in states of heightened attention, slowly relearns how to disengage from constant monitoring. This disengagement is not neglect, it is trust, a recognition that immediate threat is no longer the dominant condition. Trust, biologically, is reflected in reduced sympathetic activation and increased parasympathetic activity. The body shifts away from emergency preparedness and toward restoration and maintenance. This shift does not erase vulnerability. It simply places it in context. Life remains fragile, but no longer constantly perceived as fragile. And in that difference, experience opens again. The world becomes something more than a system of risks and responses. It becomes space for perception, interaction, and continuity. Healing, in its deepest form, does not restore a previous version of life. It restores the capacity to inhabit life without being consumed entirely by the effort of surviving it. And in that return, something quietly essential reappears: the ability to simply continue. There is a final stage of healing that is rarely recognized as a stage at all, because nothing in it announces itself. No symptom resolves in a dramatic way. No internal shift is clearly labeled. Instead, life begins to feel continuous again, in a way that no longer requires constant interpretation. The body is still present, still active, still changing moment by moment, but it no longer demands to be the center of awareness. Attention is freed, not through force, but through release. This release is gradual. It often begins as a series of unnoticed absences. A morning arrives in which there is no immediate scanning of pain or fatigue. A walk happens without calculation. A meal passes without monitoring every sensation. A night of sleep ends without anticipation of interruption. Only later does the realization form that something has changed, not because something new appeared, but because something is no longer interfering. The nervous system, which once operated in a state of heightened vigilance, slowly reorients itself toward baseline conditions. This baseline is not a fixed point. It is a dynamic range in which small fluctuations are no longer interpreted as signals of threat. Sensory input still arrives, internal signals still arise, but their emotional weight has shifted. They are no longer urgent. This change is deeply biological. The brain continuously filters incoming information through systems that determine relevance. During illness or injury, the threshold for relevance is lowered dramatically. The body becomes highly attentive to internal signals as part of survival strategy. Every sensation may carry potential meaning. As recovery unfolds, that threshold gradually rises again, not to ignore the body, but to stop over-interpreting it. This recalibration allows perception to expand outward once more. External stimuli regain richness. Environments become more detailed. Time feels less compressed by internal monitoring. Cognitive resources, no longer consumed by constant bodily evaluation, become available for other forms of engagement. Thinking becomes less restricted. Imagination returns with less resistance. Attention can rest on things beyond the self. At the same time, the body continues its quiet maintenance without requiring conscious oversight. Cellular repair remains ongoing. Immune surveillance continues. Neural activity persists in patterns that support both stability and adaptation. Metabolic systems regulate energy distribution with precision refined over a lifetime of experience. Nothing has stopped. Only the sensation of effort has diminished. This distinction is essential. Healing does not mean the absence of biological work. It means that biological work is no longer experienced as struggle. In this sense, recovery can be understood as a change in perception of internal processes rather than the disappearance of those processes themselves. Breathing, for example, has always continued. But during illness or distress, breathing may become something closely monitored. Each inhale and exhale becomes noticeable. As stability returns, breathing returns to the background of awareness, where it operates without conscious attention. The same is true of heartbeat, digestion, posture, and countless other functions. They do not cease to matter. They simply cease to dominate experience. There is also a psychological dimension to this stage of healing that is difficult to describe because it involves the quiet re-emergence of spontaneity. During prolonged disruption, behavior often becomes cautious. Actions are measured. Movement is deliberate. Decision-making is influenced by bodily condition. As recovery stabilizes, spontaneity gradually returns, not recklessness, but ease, a sense that action does not require negotiation with discomfort. This ease is often mistaken for normality, but it is actually the result of extensive internal coordination. Muscles are functioning without strain. Energy systems are balanced. Nervous system arousal is regulated within stable ranges. The body is no longer devoting significant resources to managing threat perception, and so behavior becomes less constrained. Even emotionally, there is often a subtle reappearance of variability. During illness or stress, emotional range can become compressed. Responses may become either muted or intensified depending on physiological load. As healing progresses, emotional states begin to regain flexibility. Moments of calm feel more complete. Moments of sadness feel less overwhelming. Moments of joy are no longer interrupted by constant bodily interference. This is not emotional perfection. It is emotional accessibility. And accessibility is one of the quiet hallmarks of recovery. Another aspect of this stage is the re-establishment of trust in the body's predictability. During illness, unpredictability can become a defining experience. Symptoms may fluctuate, energy may vary unpredictably, Sensations may appear without clear pattern. As recovery stabilizes, predictability returns. Not absolute certainty, but enough consistency for the nervous system to reduce its constant monitoring. This reduction in monitoring is significant. The brain consumes a large amount of energy maintaining predictive models of the body and environment. When uncertainty is high, this predictive activity intensifies. When stability returns, the system can reduce its constant updating. This frees cognitive and emotional resources, and with that freedom, experience becomes less constrained. There is also something quietly profound about how ordinary life begins to feel again during this phase. Not extraordinary, not heightened, simply ordinary in a way that feels newly available. Light through a window, the sound of distant movement, the sensation of sitting without discomfort, the ability to think without interruption from internal distress. These are not dramatic experiences, but they are deeply restorative in their continuity. Healing, at this stage, is no longer something happening to the body in an obvious way. It becomes something embedded within the ongoing structure of daily life, and because of that, it becomes harder to point to. Yet it is precisely here that recovery is most complete. Not in the absence of all sensation, but in the restoration of a stable relationship between sensation and awareness. The body continues to exist as a living system of constant change, but that change is no longer disruptive to the experience of being alive. Instead, it becomes background rhythm, subtle, continuous, and integrated. There is also a quiet realization that sometimes emerges during full recovery, though it is rarely articulated. The recognition that the body was never truly absent from its own work, even in the most difficult moments, even when awareness was narrowed by pain or fatigue, the underlying processes of repair continued, silently, consistently, without interruption. And now, in a state of stability, that same quiet persistence continues without being noticed. Healing does not end. It simply fades into the ongoing maintenance of life itself. And life, in this sense, is always already an act of recovery from every small disruption that existence brings. There is a final quiet realization that often arrives only after healing has already taken place for some time. It is not a moment of insight in the dramatic sense. It does not announce itself with clarity or certainty. Instead, it emerges slowly, almost like a background thought, becoming visible only when attention happens to settle in the right place. The body was never separate from recovery, not even in its most difficult moments, even when illness felt overwhelming, even when pain dominated perception, even when fatigue narrowed the world down to the smallest possible set of sensations. The underlying systems of repair never stopped coordinating themselves. There was never a true pause in the biological effort to maintain life. Only different levels of strain, different degrees of balance, different configurations of adaptation. From this perspective, healing is not something that begins after damage and ends in restoration. It is something that is always present, continuously active, adjusting moment by moment to whatever conditions exist. Life does not step out of disruption and into repair. It remains within repair the entire time. The difference lies in how visible that repair becomes to conscious awareness. When the body is overwhelmed, repair feels slow, uncertain, almost invisible. When stability returns, the same processes feel effortless, even unnoticed. But the activity itself is continuous in both states. Cells do not wait for permission to restore balance. Immune systems do not pause their surveillance. Neural networks do not stop adjusting their signals. The entire organism is always responding, always recalibrating, always negotiating between stress and stability. And perhaps this is why recovery often feels less like a single transformation and more like a gradual re-entry into a quieter version of the same ongoing process. There is no clear boundary where healing ends, because the systems involved never actually turn off. Even in complete health, the body is engaged in constant maintenance. Damage still occurs at microscopic levels. Repair still follows. Energy is still regulated. Tissues are still renewed. Health is not the absence of healing. It is healing that has become balanced, distributed, and no longer disruptive to awareness. This perspective changes the way vulnerability itself can be understood. Instead of being a temporary deviation from normal function, vulnerability becomes a permanent condition of biological life. Every organism is always operating within limits, always adjusting to internal and external pressures, always maintaining stability against constant change. In this sense, healing is not the exception. It is the rule. What shifts during illness or injury is not the existence of healing, but the intensity of its demand. And when that intensity decreases again, life does not return to something fundamentally different. It returns to the same continuous process operating under lighter strain. This continuity becomes more visible in long periods of stability. Days begin to feel less segmented by bodily concern. Attention is no longer repeatedly pulled inward. The mind is free to engage with the external world in a more sustained way. Thoughts can extend further without interruption. Plans can form without constant bodily negotiation. Perception can widen beyond immediate sensation. Even memory begins to feel less burdened by the urgency of recent physical experience. And yet, beneath this expanded awareness, the body continues its quiet operations. It remains responsive, adaptive, and constantly active in maintaining equilibrium. There is something almost architectural about this underlying structure. A complex system of interdependent processes arranged in such a way that stability emerges not from control, but from continuous adjustment. No single part governs everything. No single moment defines the whole. Instead, stability arises from ongoing interaction across countless systems operating simultaneously. This distributed nature of life is what allows healing to occur at all. Damage does not require a central command to be repaired. It triggers local and systemic responses that propagate through the organism, coordinating restoration through networks of communication that function beneath conscious awareness. And because of this, healing does not need to be understood in order to happen. It only needs conditions that allow it: time, energy, relative safety, and the absence of overwhelming disruption. Under those conditions, the body does what it has always done. It maintains itself, it repairs itself, it continues itself. Even emotional healing, when viewed through this lens, follows similar principles. Emotional states are not fixed objects that must be replaced. They are dynamic patterns emerging from interactions between memory, perception, physiology, and environment. When emotional distress begins to lessen, it is not because a specific part of the emotion is removed. It is because the system that sustains that emotional pattern gradually changes its configuration. The intensity decreases. The triggers lose some of their immediacy. The nervous system becomes less reactive to internal and external cues associated with past distress. Over time, this leads to a different relationship with the same memories. They remain present, but they no longer dominate the present moment. This shift is subtle but profound. It allows the past to exist without continuously shaping the present in the same way. And this is perhaps one of the most important aspects of healing across all levels: physical, emotional, neurological. It does not erase history. It changes its influence. History becomes integrated rather than invasive. Present experience becomes less constrained by what has already occurred. Future possibility becomes more accessible again. Even this sense of possibility is rooted in biology. The brain's ability to simulate future outcomes depends on networks that are also involved in memory and imagination. When these networks are under stress, future thinking can narrow. When stability returns, the ability to project forward expands again. Time itself feels different when the body is no longer in a state of constant alarm, not faster, not slower, but more open, less compressed, more continuous. And in that continuity, life begins to feel less like a sequence of interruptions and more like an ongoing field of experience. Healing then can be understood as the restoration of continuity, not perfection, not immunity from change, but continuity that is no longer constantly disrupted by internal distress signals. And once that continuity returns, it becomes difficult to remember what it felt like to live without it. Not because the memory is erased, but because it is no longer reinforced by present experience. The body no longer behaves as though it is in crisis. The mind no longer interprets the body as unstable. Together, they settle into a quieter agreement. Life is ongoing, and within that ongoing state, healing continues in its most fundamental form, not as an event, but as the uninterrupted, unseen process through which living systems remain capable of existing at all. In the quietest phase of healing, something subtle happens to attention itself. It no longer circles the body with the same intensity. It no longer returns repeatedly to areas of discomfort, scanning for signs of instability. Instead, attention begins to drift outward again, not in a sudden release, but in a slow redistribution of awareness across the wider field of experience. The body remains present, but it is no longer the only thing present. This shift is so gradual that it is often only recognized in retrospect. A person may realize one day that they have been thinking about something unrelated to their physical state for an extended period of time, or that a moment passed without internal checking or evaluation, or that sleep arrived without negotiation. These are not dramatic events, they are absences of strain. And in healing, absences often carry more meaning than additions. Biologically, this corresponds with a reduction in baseline arousal within the nervous system. The sympathetic system, responsible for mobilizing the body in response to perceived threat, becomes less dominant. The parasympathetic system, associated with restoration and energy conservation, regains balance. Neither system disappears. They simply regain rhythm with each other. This rhythmic balance is essential. Life is not sustained by constant relaxation or constant activation, but by dynamic alternation between the two. Healing restores that alternation. It allows the body to move more freely between engagement and rest, rather than remaining anchored in one prolonged state. As this balance returns, internal signals begin to lose their urgency. Sensations that once demanded immediate interpretation become more neutral. The nervous system stops treating every fluctuation as meaningful, not because it becomes less sensitive, but because it becomes more calibrated. Calibration is one of the most understated achievements of recovery. It is not about silence. It is about proportion. In a calibrated system, signals are still present, but they are weighted appropriately. A minor sensation is not treated as a crisis. A normal fluctuation is not mistaken for danger. The body learns, again and again, what level of response is necessary for each type of input. This learning is continuous, and it is shaped by repeated experience. Every moment of stability reinforces a different expectation of what internal states mean. Over time, these expectations become more reliable. The nervous system begins to trust its own regulation again. Trust, in this biological sense, is not conceptual. It is reflected in reduced corrective overreaction. It is seen in smoother transitions between states. It is felt in the absence of unnecessary escalation. And as trust increases, energy becomes less consumed by monitoring. That energy is redistributed into thinking, into perceiving, into interacting with the environment without constant internal interruption. There is also a quiet shift in how the body is inhabited. During illness or prolonged distress, the body can feel like something being managed, observed, or negotiated with. Every action carries awareness of limitation. Every movement may require evaluation. As recovery deepens, this evaluative layer gradually recedes. The body becomes less of an object of concern and more of a medium of experience again. Walking is no longer a calculation. Sitting is no longer monitored. Breathing is no longer observed. These processes return to background function, where they have always operated most efficiently. This return is not forgetfulness. It is reintegration. At the same time, deeper physiological systems continue their work with remarkable consistency. Cellular repair remains active in tissues throughout the body. Protein synthesis and breakdown maintain structural balance. Immune cells continue to patrol and adapt. Neural networks continue adjusting synaptic strength in response to ongoing experience. Even in full recovery, the body remains in constant flux. But this flux is no longer disruptive to awareness. It becomes invisible again, as it is in states of health. And invisibility, in this context, is not absence. It is successful integration of process into background function. There is something quietly remarkable about this. The systems that sustain life are not designed to be noticed. They are designed to function. Awareness of them tends to increase only when they are disrupted. Healing, therefore, is partly a return to not needing to notice them so intensely, not because they stopped mattering, but because they are working in harmony again. This harmony extends beyond the physical body into emotional and cognitive experience as well. Emotional fluctuations become less disruptive. Thoughts move with less friction. Memory no longer carries the same immediate physiological weight. Even difficult memories begin to change in tone. Not because they disappear, but because the body no longer reacts to them as if they are occurring in the present moment. This separation between memory and immediate physiological response is one of the subtle achievements of emotional healing. It allows experience to be remembered without being relived, and this distinction is crucial because when memory is no longer automatically embodied as current threat, space opens for reflection rather than reaction. In this space, meaning can shift, understanding can deepen, and the past becomes something that is carried rather than something that is constantly reenacted. Meanwhile, the external world begins to feel more accessible again. Attention can rest on details that were previously overshadowed. The texture of everyday environments becomes more noticeable. Time spent in ordinary settings feels less compressed by internal urgency. Even stillness becomes less charged. It no longer feels like waiting for something to change internally. It becomes simply part of being present, and presence itself changes tone. It becomes less fragmented, more continuous, more spacious. There is also a quiet re-emergence of curiosity that often accompanies deeper recovery. When the body is no longer constantly demanding attention, cognitive energy becomes available for exploration again. Thoughts can extend beyond immediate concern. Interest in external ideas, environments, and people can return. This curiosity is not forced. It reappears naturally as internal demands decrease. It is one of the earliest signs that the nervous system is no longer in survival prioritization mode, and it often feels surprisingly ordinary. A question arises without urgency. A moment of interest appears without tension. A small engagement with the world happens without bodily resistance. These are not dramatic indicators of healing, but they are reliable ones. Across all levels of biological organization, from cellular processes to cognitive experience, the same pattern continues to emerge. Healing is not a single transition from one state to another. It is a gradual redistribution of balance across interconnected systems. No single system heals alone. All systems adjust together. And as they do, the experience of being alive becomes less centered on disruption and more centered on continuity. Not perfect continuity, not unchanging stability, but continuity that can accommodate change without being defined entirely by it. In this sense, healing is not the removal of fragility. It is the restoration of a way of living within fragility that no longer feels constantly threatened by it. And within that restored way of living, life quietly continues, moment by moment, in the ongoing presence of a body that is always both changing and maintaining itself at the same time. There is a final layer of healing that is rarely noticed, because it does not announce itself through change in the body at all. Instead, it appears in the background of experience as a quiet shift in how life is interpreted, not what is happening, but how what is happening is felt. The body may already be stable. Symptoms may have resolved. Energy may have returned. Yet something more subtle continues adjusting long after visible recovery has occurred. It is the relationship between awareness and sensation that continues to reorganize itself. In earlier stages of illness or injury, sensation often carries weight beyond itself. A small discomfort can feel amplified. A minor fluctuation can feel significant. The nervous system, operating under conditions of heightened vigilance, assigns greater meaning to internal signals than it normally would. As recovery deepens, that amplification gradually decreases. Sensations are still present, but they are no longer automatically interpreted as indicators of danger. This change is not immediate. It is learned slowly through repeated experience of stability. Each moment in which nothing worsens reinforces a different internal model of the body. Each period of rest without collapse strengthens a quieter expectation that equilibrium is possible. Over time, the nervous system updates its predictions, not through conscious effort, but through accumulated evidence. And when enough evidence accumulates, Perception itself begins to shift. What once felt urgent becomes ordinary. What once felt fragile becomes manageable. What once felt central begins to recede into the background of awareness. This is not detachment from the body. It is normalization of internal experience, a return to conditions where sensation does not constantly require interpretation. In neuroscience, this relates closely to how predictive processing shapes perception. The brain is not a passive receiver of bodily signals. It actively generates expectations about what the body should feel like, and continuously adjusts these expectations based on incoming information. During illness, these predictions become highly sensitive. During recovery, they are gradually recalibrated, and as recalibration stabilizes, the gap between expectation and sensation narrows. This narrowing reduces internal conflict, and with less conflict, experience becomes smoother, less fragmented. Even pain, when it appears, may be interpreted differently. Not necessarily as less intense in raw sensation, but as less dominant in shaping overall awareness. It becomes one signal among many, rather than the organizing center of experience. At the same time, deeper physiological systems continue to maintain equilibrium beneath awareness. Cellular repair processes remain active. Protein turnover continues. Neural networks continue adjusting synaptic strengths in response to ongoing experience. The immune system continues its quiet surveillance of internal environments. None of this ever truly stops. But in stable health, it no longer rises to the level of conscious concern. This separation between process and perception is one of the defining features of recovery. The body continues its work, but awareness is no longer consumed by it. There is also a broader shift that often emerges during long recovery periods. It is a change in temporal experience itself. Time, which may have felt compressed or fragmented during illness, begins to regain continuity. Days stop being measured primarily by symptoms or fluctuations. They begin to be experienced as sequences of ordinary events again. Morning leads into afternoon, afternoon into evening, evening into rest. This simple continuity may seem trivial, but it reflects a profound reorganization of internal regulation. Circadian rhythms stabilize. Hormonal cycles regain consistency. Sleep becomes more predictable. Wakefulness becomes less burdened by residual fatigue or uncertainty. Time becomes less reactive to internal disturbance and more aligned with external rhythm. This alignment allows life to feel less interrupted by the body. The body remains present, but it no longer dictates the structure of time itself. There is also a quiet return of attentional flexibility. During illness or prolonged stress, attention often becomes constrained. It repeatedly returns to bodily sensation, internal monitoring, or threat evaluation. As recovery progresses, this constraint loosens. Attention begins to move more freely again. It can rest on external environments, on conversation, on thought, on perception itself. This flexibility is essential for cognitive and emotional well-being. It allows the mind to engage with complexity without being anchored constantly to internal distress signals. In this state, even simple experiences can regain depth. A quiet room, a familiar sound, the act of sitting without strain. These experiences are no longer overshadowed by competing internal demands. They are simply experienced, and experience itself becomes less filtered. There is also something quietly significant about the return of spontaneity. During illness, many actions become intentional in a way that is usually unnecessary. Movement is calculated, energy is conserved, decisions are evaluated through the lens of bodily limitation. As recovery stabilizes, this layer of calculation fades. Actions begin to occur more naturally again, without negotiation, without constant internal assessment. Spontaneity returns not as impulsivity, but as ease, a state in which action is no longer heavily mediated by concern. Even emotional life reflects this shift. Emotions become less constrained by physiological strain. They arise and resolve with greater fluidity. The nervous system is less locked into defensive patterns. allowing a broader range of emotional expression to emerge again, not exaggerated, not suppressed, but balanced. There is also a quiet but important change in how memory is experienced. Memories associated with illness or distress may remain intact, but their emotional charge often diminishes over time. They become less immediately embodied, less physically activating, more observational in nature. This does not mean forgetting, it means integration. The past is no longer experienced as continuously present, and this separation between past and present is one of the most essential elements of psychological recovery. It allows lived experience to remain part of identity without constantly shaping current physiological state. As these layers stabilize, a deeper sense of continuity emerges again, not the continuity of perfect health or unchanging stability, but the continuity of a system that is no longer defined by disruption. Life continues, and the body continues with it. Repair processes remain active, but they no longer dominate awareness. Regulation continues, but it no longer feels like effort. Experience unfolds, but it is no longer constantly interrupted by internal alarm. In this state, healing is no longer something that is happening. It is something that has been absorbed into the ongoing structure of living. And what remains is not a conclusion, but a quiet understanding that the body has always been engaged in this same uninterrupted effort, maintaining, adjusting, repairing, and continuing, long before awareness noticed it, and long after awareness stops paying attention to it. Life does not step out of healing. It lives within it, always.